And we're live. Okay, welcome everyone. This is going to be the 8th episode of Pint NL Thuis, which is the online series of Pint of Science Netherlands. We're very happy to host the first event for Maastricht. So Pint of Science Maastricht is in the house, yay! So my name is Linda. I am the city coordinator of Pint of Science Maastricht, and I'm also a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Data Science, which is part of Maastricht University. If you're interested in looking back at the other events, I really encourage you to visit our YouTube channel of Pint of Science Netherlands. But without further ado, I would like to give the credit now, and I would like to give our volunteers the floor. So on both my sides, there's Domenico and Julia, who made sure that this event could take place. And they will also be the moderators of today's event. So I'd like to give the floor now to Julia. Yeah, I think so, right?
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, Linda. So today, I will just start with framing the problem shortly. We will talk about the COVID-19 pandemic from a societal perspective. So as you all know, up to date, the COVID-19 pandemic has so far infected 47.5 million people around the world and around 8 million people in Europe and the UK. And in the Netherlands, up to date, there are 370,000 active cases. And the pandemic required us all to take our distance and challenge us with the daily basis of uncertainties. And we are almost 1 year in the pandemic now, as the first case was last year on the 17th of November. And we've all been coping with this impact on our own way. And at the same time, countries are making efforts to finally approve drugs and vaccines that will hopefully ease the impact of the virus of our lives. So yesterday, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands announced stricter measures again. And not one talk show goes by without the notion of the coronavirus. And as we are sitting here now with our glass of beer, our pint of science, I just feel like Eva Jinek hosting yet another talk show. But however, tonight we will not only give more information about the pandemic or numbers, as you all get to see it and hear it everywhere around you. So we will reflect more on the societal part, and we will go into discussion on the public trust in the health sector.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. On that note, we want to welcome two very honored guests, philosophers and sociologists of public health, Klasien Horstmann and Bart Penders, who are both professors and assistant professor at Maastricht University, who are also happen to be colleagues. So, particularly, we want to emphasize the topic of vaccination hesitancy. So with all this going on around the world, everybody seems to be affected somehow. These measures also seem to influence our behaviors, right, on a daily basis, and also how we take decisions for ourselves. We want to welcome our guests to speak about these behaviors and these sociological phenomena. And also maybe I want to give the word to our guests first, so they can also maybe say some words about themselves. Maybe Klasien, you want to start?
Okay, thank you. Now, first, thank you for the invitation to participate in this Pint of Science, and so cheers. And to have an exchange of thoughts and ideas, and to tell a little bit about our research with respect to, say, vaccination practices and discussions about vaccination. I'm a sociologist, a philosophical sociologist, with a background in all kinds of studies about, say, science, technology, science, politics, society relations with respect to public health issues. So infectious disease control, antimicrobial resistance prevention, health promotion programs, more exercise, but then always we try to study the science, politics, society relationship. So it's quite reflective, philosophical. It's always about democracy and science. And these kind of issues also come to the fore in this about vaccination. We will see that later, I think. Maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a slightly different background than Klasien, even though we ended up working in a similar place and doing similar things. I started out completely differently. Actually quite similar, Domenica and Julia, to you, as a microbiologist, a molecular microbiologist. And it took a while for me to first of all, to finish that degree. But in the process of finishing that degree and working in various laboratories, I noticed these very small differences between different places that you work and how people talk about science and how people talk about the truth and about the value that they imbue in the processes that they care for. And over time, that grew into something that I was fascinated about and pursued further in the form of a PhD in science and technology studies. And science and technology studies is sort of a group term for a critical body of work that reflectively deals with science. History of science, philosophy of science, sociology of science, anthropology of science, all bundled into one nice and rich package. And that is what I have been doing ever since. And in most of my work, I try to understand, to study and try to understand how it is that scientists are and can continue to remain credible. How do they produce credible claims, and how what is it about them or their work or the way they organize themselves that they've managed to take up that societal role that they have. And that too means that I have to think critically about the relationship between science, society, democracy, institutions, all the sorts of things that Klasien also just mentioned, but from a slightly different angle. But we get together regularly and find that we manage to think about problems and issues in similar ways. And that includes, as you will see, critical thought on vaccination and vaccination practices.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So now that we know each other better, let's have a toast. First of all, that we are all here together. And yeah, also a toast to science, right? Yeah. Us.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Enjoy.
Not too fast, right? All right. So now let's get started, right? So we already have prepared some questions, but we wish for an interactive discussion. So to the audience and the viewers, please feel free to send us your questions. You can write opinions in the comment section, and we will try also to bring them to the discussion and and then see how this conversation evolves. So to pose one of our first questions, what does vaccination hesitancy actually mean? Today we know that vaccination and national immunization programs have been very useful to help us to get rid of very devastating disease. So why are people hesitating to actually get vaccinated, and maybe how's it changing now in the COVID-19 pandemic?
Maybe I can start. I think that globally there's a kind of idea about that all countries will develop vaccination programs, and the WHO has a kind of format for the standardized national vaccination program, and many countries implement this. And although there may be some exceptions for different countries because they have specific tropical diseases, for instance, so they have kind of specific conditions in this format, but there's a kind of global format for vaccination program, which is implemented in, at least countries try to implement it in, everywhere in that sense. At the same time, you see that in every country, there are people who will not become vaccinated. And then the issue is, of course, how do we define that problem? So you can say these are people who refuse, but then you assume that it is the choice of the people not to become vaccinated. And sometimes that's the case. But for instance, say in the Netherlands, we have a kind of stable group of, very specific Protestant group of people who, for religious reasons, do not vaccinate. They did not do it, say, in the 1950s, nor in the 1970s, and part of them, or a large part of them, they do not do it now. So that's a kind of stable group of people who refuse to become vaccinated. But in many countries, people are not vaccinated because they do not have access to the healthcare system at all. Say, traveling people in Ireland or in Romania, or people living in very remote areas. Although that sometimes is not because, say, Kenya has a rather high vaccination rate because public health there is not asking people to come to them, but they visit the villages in Kenya to get people vaccinated. So how you actually define the problem is very important. When you say vaccination hesitancy, then it's hesitancy among the public. So that's the people, the citizens then are assumed to be hesitant. And sometimes I think that's not the case. And the concept of hesitancy has been developed to make a difference between, say, acceptance and refusal. Because public health bodies globally notice that many people are somewhere in between. There are some people who are really fierce refusals or really fierce acceptance. They really like to be vaccinated. They are in favor of it. But there are some people who have their doubts, but not really clear about it and not clear about whether they will accept it or refuse it. And for the first child, they accept it, and the second, and then the third child, they think, no, I do not do it anymore. Like so there's and the concept of vaccination hesitancy was developed to pinpoint to this group of people, which is not so black and white, and from a group that also is in a way not known so very well. So sometimes public health bodies suspect that there might be an iceberg of people who are hesitant and they are still accepting vaccinations now, but maybe they will not do it anymore in 5 years or something like that. So it's a kind of difficult concept, and it shows partly also the insecurity, I think, of global public health bodies about the public and how the public will actually relate to the offer of vaccination in the near future. Because I think for many decades, the people who refused were quite known. And they say, okay, that's part of our landscape. Most people do it, but these will not do it. And then I think 2 decades ago, suddenly it appeared that, part of the public did not accept vaccination, especially the vaccination for HPV. Globally was suddenly a very low vaccination rate, and suddenly global public health people were kind of shocked, like, okay, many new groups do not vaccinate anymore. And then all kinds of controversies developed about, what is vaccination? Why is it fruitful? Should we do it? And then also social media popped up, and you have social media discussions and bubbles, and then the landscape was changed a lot. The landscape of these debates. Maybe that's a start.
I think that the fact that people are not being vaccinated and or at least show up in statistics as not vaccinated and being hesitant, those are not the same categories. And Klasien touched upon it from one angle, but it also works the other way around. There are also people who do not show up in statistics as vaccinated, but they are in fact vaccinated. They are not hesitant. For instance, I'm sitting in my study right now in the village of Vals, which is on the German border, and half of the population that lives here is German, and most of them use the German healthcare system, including vaccination. So when they are vaccinated, and many of them are, similar numbers as the rest of the country, but they do not show up in German statistics because they don't live there, and they don't show up in Dutch statistics because they didn't receive the vaccination there. So if you look at the vaccination maps of the Netherlands, you see this Bible Belt that Klasien talked about with low vaccination numbers, but you also see in the corner of the country a municipality with low vaccination numbers for different reasons. That has nothing to do with hesitant citizens. So those categories are not the same. They can exclude each other in both directions. And I think that that's important to keep in mind when we talk about hesitancy, that it's not the same as not being vaccinated, and that hesitancy itself is multifaceted. And to just think about it as a decision really undresses the issue into one specific group. And if you only think about hesitancy as a decision, then you will only think about ways of combating it also as about that decision. But in practice, it's about a lot more than that.
Yeah,
that's I think what's the problem, right?
That the rise of the concept of vaccination hesitancy, I think, expresses that, say, public health bodies cannot predict anymore how citizens will relate to them, whether citizens will follow their advices or not. And so the whole concept expresses that insecurity in these relationships.
Yeah, and that's an interesting big. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You're in charge. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So by framing this problem and also by touching upon what is really vaccine hesitancy, you were already touched upon some of the underlying reasons, but maybe it's interesting to dive more into those determinants or those reasons for people to be hesitant with vaccination. And you also had a very nice recent publication on vaccine hesitancy in China, on more recent one, which was only published yesterday. The link of your recent article that was published yesterday will pop in the screen in a minute. So also for the audience, if you're interested, please take a look. So maybe you could reflect more on that a bit. So what the major determinants for people to hesitate are, and how vaccine hesitancy, how it is like compared to the Netherlands.
Also, to add before that, because we know that, I think it's quite normal for us who get vaccinated to say, like, it is easily said, why don't you get vaccinated, right? You almost say it as there's no legitimate reason for hesitancy in our bubble, let's say, right, in our very European bubble. So yeah, maybe to add that as a very personal point of view.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that one of the things that Klasien started with essentially is that in all countries there are groups that choose to not actively pursue vaccination. But that doesn't mean that they do it for the same reasons, that they have the same motivations, or that they exist in similar contexts that lead to decisions or situations that they are or are not vaccinated. And the Netherlands and China are similar in the sense that they have high vaccination rates. So it's all well above 90%. And if we talk about sort of uptake of scientific knowledge, 90+% is really high. Even if we talk about hesitancy in European context or Chinese context, it's not a default or dominant position at all. It's mostly a fringe position to be in. But there are relevant and interesting differences between situations in China and in the Netherlands. Klasien has studied vaccination practices in the Netherlands before. And now we've studied vaccination practices in China. And we do notice these differences. And for instance, one of the things that turns out to be quite important to the general public in China, and doesn't really feature in Dutch discussions, is that China has had a series of scandals with respect to vaccination safety. Basic things like companies who make vaccines committing fraud in the sense that nothing's actually in the vaccine, it's just something like water or another solution, or that it has been transported, stored, or used in a way that essentially renders it ineffectively, but that these vaccines have still been used to actually vaccinate people who then do not know whether they are actually vaccinated or not. So that creates real uncertainty in communities, in countries, and through a series of these events, the practical and real life safety of vaccines has emerged as a legitimate concern to Chinese publics, and that is not really something we think about as a legitimate concern for decision making around vaccination here in the Netherlands. It serves to show that when we talk about hesitancy globally, that we cannot sort of universally point at one thing and then hope to solve it that way. It is a very local manifestation of this multifaceted problem.
No, yeah, maybe to make it even more seriously, I think in China quite some died after vaccination because the vaccine was not safe, and parents were of course very concerned. So and in many Western countries, safety in that sense is not an issue. Moreover, I think, of course, here we also have side effects sometimes, or people have the idea that there may be side effects which are related to a vaccination. But then say the administration of side effects and the transparency of this administration and the accountability with respect to safety issues is much more open and transparent compared to, say, China. And in that sense, you see that the kind of democracy that we are in here and the openness of, say, democratic institutions, also knowledge institutions like, say, national public health bodies, is organized differently compared to China, where authoritarian state also needs to relate to the concerns of parents, which are expressed on Chinese social media fora. But at the same time, this accountability culture is, it's much more authoritative. It's less open than here, that's how we described it, at least. Maybe you can add something, Bart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think an interesting addition to that, if there's time, is that if you look at the way that currently new vaccines that are developed to help us combat this pandemic that we are in right now, if you look at the way these trials are communicated, it's almost front page news now, and vaccine trials never were, but they are now. And it becomes quite clear to all of us as an audience of that, that there is still some form of lacking transparency. When somebody in a trial gets ill, then we hear about it, but not exactly, completely all the details. And then you start wondering, and then reports afterward are blacked out, or pharmaceutical companies are not fully disclosing what's actually happening. And one of the responses to that tends to be, and you've probably all seen it on social media, that these news headings are sort of communicated with the message, this is how vaccine hesitancy is born. And up to a certain point, that is not nonsense. It's not as black and white, of course, as that. But these are the types of social elements that feeds into this problem, not only in China, where there is a lot of politicization of science communication, of course, but also here in the West.
So we already have quite some interesting questions from the audience, and I think you might have addressed some of these already. So we have, what do you think about the role of mistrust in the government or doubts in vaccination campaigns? So I think we touched upon that, right?
But it's an excellent question.
Maybe we can say a little bit more about it.
Yeah, please.
Because I think when it comes to vaccination debates, many people speak of, say, citizens distrusting the knowledge institutes or the public health bodies or the state. And then how people use the notion of distrust is in a very generalized way. And I think when you take a closer look to how the relation between citizens and state or public health bodies, which are allied to the state often, then you see that trust is much more differentiated and much more layered than a kind of general distrust or trust thing. You trust people to do specific things more or less well or not so well, or you may have some doubts, but that's not completely distrust or something like that. So I think that to generalize this notion of distrust, I think is not an adequate representation of what is happening in these debates. Moreover, you can say sometimes lack of trust might be justified, because when institutions do not do their job very well, then some distrust is justified. And I think you can sometimes when say, and I think that's not the case in the Netherlands and many European countries. So you can see that the vaccination programs are organized very, very well, very open, very transparent. So there's not so reason to distrust them in that respect. On the other hand, you might say that part of the back office that is so organized so very well is not too open for people. People only see the end result. They see when their child is injected, and they do not see how the vaccine is being produced, how it is traveling, how it is stored, how it is. And maybe the citizens and the public need to know a little bit more about this back office of vaccination programs to produce more trust in that. Because why? So it is not hidden. I think you can make very nice documentaries about this to show how well it is taken care of. And of course, then there may be mistakes and there may be accidents. That's always the case. They happen everywhere. But how they are dealt with, I think that's crucial for how people can trust it or not.
Yeah, and it's important to if you specifically place trust, then it's important to realize that vaccination programs are political programs executed by governments, but they use science. So when you distrust a government infrastructure in whatever country you are in, that doesn't necessarily extend to you distrusting the scientists that provide the knowledge to run that program. And we see it in the elections that many of us have followed today, actually in the US, that distrust of political institutions and of states can create quite detrimental effects, even in countries that we consider to be rich, stable, and so forth. So when you talk about trust, differentiation, where you place it, under which conditions you place it, and in what exactly you place it, all matter. And it's never, again, black and white.
Yeah, that also actually nicely answers the question of Evelyn. And also by reflecting on the role of social media, what do you think that social media can do, or what the role of social media is in the context of vaccination distrust, as asked by one of our viewers?
It's difficult to say because it is not, as Klasien started by saying, there was vaccination hesitancy in the 50s and in the 70s and in the 90s, and there were really no social media around then. So it's not that it generates hesitancy, but what it does do is make the topic, create a platform in which those who are critical or skeptical can find one another and discuss this topic perhaps more easily than before. That means that it creates some form of social order around critical voices with respect to vaccine hesitancy, or critical voices with respect to vaccination in general. and allows more public visibility for you and I and our audience, but also politicians and citizens, to see these critical voices and to perhaps amplify them, because that is also how social media works, of course. But at the same time, the opposite, the pushing back by other voices on social media, is witnessed as well. And we see, public debate, especially now, since we're all confined to our screens, taking place on Twitter, on TikTok, on all the platforms that you can imagine. They have taken over some of the roles of a market square in which you could just talk to one another and disagree, sometimes agree to disagree, and sometimes fight out that disagreement. But social media is not the boogeyman in that sense. It is a changing infrastructure for conversations and debates in society that are not necessarily new, but they take on new shapes.
Yeah, but we may say that, at least I think that the commercial structure of many social media forms, I think they really require a critical look and new policies, because they purposefully construct bubbles for advertisement money and they do not help people to get in touch with kind of new voices or new ideas or other type of knowledge that they already know. So what one of our colleagues did a kind of analysis of Twitter communities with respect to vaccination in the Netherlands, the vaccination debate on Twitter. And what you see is that it's quite small communities. So while we think there's a huge controversy, what you see actually on Twitter, that it's quite small community. So I think we exaggerate the extremes, and we think that the extremes are bigger or larger than they actually are. But these communities were also quite stable. So there was also a community of the National Public Health body, and a community of people who were very much anti-vaccination because they thought that our immune systems would develop in a natural way. And you had a group of people who had religious motive, but they were very stable. There was not any change between these communities. So it does not do anything. It's not even a debate or a discussion or a conversation. It's just shouting out your own ideas again and again and again and again. And I think that I would hope that social media platforms could be more like a market or an arena or a new space for exchange. And currently, I think in many controversies, it's not. So there's a responsibility for these social media platforms to organize public life in a more decent way in that respect. But I think it's also very important that institutions like public health offices will connect more to the digital world. I think they are still a little bit surprised with the power of social media, and they are not used to work with them very well. And I think we need to have much more connections between the analog and the digital world in many debates about the role of science in our democracies, not only this specific topic.
I think we all agree if we say that we would all love to see more productive use of social media in any ways, right? Whether it's only society, politics, science, in any situation. So, Julia, you have another question.
Yes. So as you already said, indeed, there's this relationship between science, politics and society, which is really difficult to grasp. And as vaccination programs, they really depend on all the three to be successful. So how do you think that this works, and how does really, what does the current debate on lockdowns and transmission and the measures that are taken, what does it teach us, and how do those different aspects interact?
Yeah, what these debates right now teach us is how science is not enough to make any sort of call on whether or not you go into lockdown, whether or not you impose a new restriction, whether or not you choose to soften them, because in many cases, especially in pandemic times, we see that a lot of data is missing. So you'll just have to work with estimates and do the best that you can. But also, and that is, I think, more important, is that you see that these types of decisions, they tend to be driven not by facts but by values, but the values that we hopefully share. But that's not always exactly the case, of course. But that means that when you implement a lockdown, when you implement a vaccination program, essentially both are big policy decisions, that the underlying values that we try to convey through them, that they can and often do trump, that's not an unintended pun, the facts or the science or the knowledge or the just descriptive content on disease transmission that we tend to think it's all about, but it's much more about those values than it is about those facts.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So maybe we continue with another question. We would really like to make a poll. We're also asking our technical team in the background whether this is possible. But but what it is about is, it's about innovation in vaccination development. So this whole pandemic has really kicked off development that we have not seen on that scale before. As vaccines become more innovative and their mechanisms of action becomes more complex, we speak here about mRNA vaccines and all these type of things that are different from what we've known to be giving our to everybody the past 20, 30, 40 years. So they become more complex, and also all the countries race for an effective solution. So there might be a realistic chance that several vaccines may be available to us. So what does that mean for a national immunization program or the general public? Many people might become reluctant to actually take a decision at all because they don't feel competent enough to judge. Right, so if you have 3 vaccines offered to you, and you may choose which one you use, I can imagine that many people will not like to take a decision and may, rather become hesitant than actually, building trust in public health bodies. So, how do we deal with that? Is this innovation a blessing or a curse?
Well, I think first of all, a lot of the innovation is not actually technological innovation, but policy innovation. If you see that the speeding up of the vaccine development and the approval processes and the support infrastructures and economic support for the entire process, if you look at the vaccines being built right now, they are paid for differently. The process is governed and supervised differently, and the risks are outsourced to governments instead of to countries. And the evaluations of safety run parallel to the actual development, which tends to be more sequential. All of that are policy innovations, much more than there are sort of new technical tools available to make vaccines. The latter is the case, and we do indeed have these RNA-driven vaccination trajectories, but most of the vaccines in the pipeline right now are made traditionally. And not all of them, but most of them. But they are sped up through policy innovation as opposed to technological innovation. Is that a blessing or a curse? Are we compromising on safety? That is one of the questions, of course, when you talk about these acceleration processes in terms of policy. And that's the follow-up question, is that compromise on safety worth the increase in speed. And that is, of course, a moral and ethical question that up to a certain point even falls or encapsulates all of this discussion, because it needs to take into account essentially all of the things that we've said before. And again, we see that these government structures are national, and that these types of decisions are also made differently. In Russia, people are being vaccinated right now with a vaccine that many people consider to be not safe, because it has not, it's not sure that it's not safe, but it hasn't been tested sufficiently, at least according to the general standards that we tend to use for that. And then it becomes a national contest, a race for a vaccine that the Russians wanted to win. And at what price? I would say possibly too high a price, but I can't be sure.
Yeah, to add, so we would like to have you answer this poll, so whether innovation in vaccination development right now is a blessing or a curse, on the Pint of Science Twitter account, so we can also see what you guys think about it.
Can people answer both, or do they have to choose?
I think they have to choose.
Oh, that's a shame.
I also want to add maybe, before we go to Klasien's opinion on that. So if we consider now that in the European Union we have our standards of clinical testing, so we have our clinical trials from phase 1 till 3, and we won't. And it was said that nobody will compromise on these clinical trials. The drug has to go through that trial the same way as any other drug, but just how it got to this clinical trial might have been different, or might have been pushed, might have been funded to a greater extent. So if we assume that now, but this still leads to several vaccination options for us, yeah, is that then still, if the safety issue, let's say, is a less of an issue, yeah, at the end?
In general, I like societies where we have different routes to a certain goal, and where we can have a choice. And not only because it's important to have a choice, but also because when we have different routes and we try them out all, then we can learn a lot from them. I think modern societies, it's not like our learning processes are not top down. It's not like being a process of instruction, being instructed and then learning how to jump through a hoop or something like that. Complex societies, there's a lot of insecurity and uncertainty, and especially now we are in a kind of, it feels like we are in a period of science in action, we are together in an experiment, and that's amazingly, it's also, I love it in a way to follow all the debates and the discussions, and to see how people become engaged in these discussions, and maybe some people cry out nonsense, but nevertheless, I think it is a huge moment also, science and technology, to show not only what they are capable of, but also to show how they can create social accountability, and how can they relate to, say, society and to political arenas. And in that sense, I find it really an intriguing period of time in that sense. But also, I do not see that if there are different vaccines, that is a lack of trust. I think that all these routes will be followed and monitored, and we will learn a lot about these different routes. I always say to people, I'm so happy to have, say, home birth, hospital birth, hotel birth, whatsoever, because we can learn a lot from home birth. And the moment when a society is in crisis and the hospitals are full and pregnant women, they need to give birth at home. Oh, what are we happy that we still have midwives who can assist a home birth, you know? So we should, as a complex society, you become resilient, because when you have different routes explored and installed, and keeping intact and not only choosing for the one golden standard, or the one most efficient standard. We know efficiency has a price that you lose your variety and your resilience. So I do not see different vaccines as a lack of trust. Maybe when they choose for one because of efficiency and price arguments will play a role whatsoever, but maybe that's not the best route anyway.
It's also quite likely. It's quite likely that these vaccines are not only made by different companies and different people and originate from different countries, but that they all are also biochemically different in the sense that they generate different types and lengths of immunity with different upsides for different age groups or different population groups. And in that sense, it creates options, and it's not a fully free choice or something like that, because again, even in matching vaccines with the people who are supposed to be vaccinated by them is also a science and an art, probably, but that's part of this option of choice. They will not be equivalent in no way. They might be similar, but not equivalent.
And it might be a good idea to organize this even on a European level, and not only do have these different routes within one country, but also do it on a European level and collaborate in this.
And we see the sort of pursuit of efficiency we've seen it in for instance, amount of Dutch IC beds. And the immediate consequences for that is that we needed help from our big brother to the east. And they were not so efficient. They had different reasons for organizing their IC capacity. And it turned out rather well for them and ultimately also for us. Yeah. Again, European solidarity there also showed its value.
Yeah, showing some European love. I completely.
It's a positive note.
Yeah, absolutely. It's working for now, and we're really happy that it is. So this is good, and it is all about the solidarity we show with each other right now. I mean, we're also we all sit behind the screen. We're sick of wearing our mask, of not touching each other, of not being with each other, but still we do it. We meet online and we try to feel each other's pain, right? To some extent, to maybe make each other feel better, right? And I think so far this is working quite well. We hope that this is gonna, we actually, it's almost impossible to make an approximation when this is going to end. So I just don't do it anymore. So we just hope it turns out fine soon. So maybe we don't have many more questions. We do ask some of them. Or what do you think about vaccination hesitancy among healthcare providers? And do you think it will increase with the COVID-19 vaccine? So this is our last question, and then we have also a short one before we want to end on a very nice note.
This is really an interesting one, because it's amazing that, say, indeed, vaccination hesitancy and even also refusal among healthcare providers, say nurses and doctors, is quite high, higher than among the general population in many countries. And you would not expect that, because these people, they have an education in one discipline of healthcare. They are healthcare professionals, and you would think that they are the most motivated to go, say, for vaccination, also against flu or whatever. Countries, one specific type of vaccination is mandatory for them, like, say, tuberculosis or something like that. But they are offered more, and many times you see that quite large part of the healthcare professionals are indeed hesitant or refusing this offer of vaccination. So what you see is, and that's also interesting, that we did a study of this in one specific hospital, that you see that the people who end up taking the offer of the vaccine are not also very much in favor, but they have the similar kind of arguments with respect to vaccination, that they say, I'm not sure whether it helps. I'm performing hygiene very well. I wash my hands all the time. I'm really taking care of my health. So what's the added value of this vaccination? I'm not sure, but and you'll take it. And then some other people who will not take it, they have a similar kind of argument, but then they end up like, I'm not so sure. I wash my hands, I perform hygiene, I take good care of my health, and it's not necessary. So it's not like these are completely different type of professionals, but it's people who point to the fact that in their work they are very responsible. Even when they are working on an intensive care unit or other units with very vulnerable patients, they stress the fact that they are really responsible professionals taking care of all kinds of risks and taking care of the health of the people that they care for. And still they may end up. So it's a kind of, and it's not irrational in a sense, but it's more like they also know what the specific value of a vaccine may be in that context. They know it's not 100% guarantee, say Mexican flu or something like that, or it's not flu anyway, it's not 100% guarantee that you will not get ill. So they are balancing the different arguments, the different risks, and then they take a decision. So it's very, and I'm not sure what healthcare providers or healthcare professionals will do when COVID-19 vaccine will be offered to them. I find it very interesting to follow this up.
Yeah, one of the things that also matters here is that these healthcare workers, they are experts, but they are also sort of institutionally embedded in the healthcare system, and they know the back office quite well, and they know the type of work that's being done there. But in terms of trusting that infrastructure, they are also the people who are underpaid, have to overwork, and are not always respected by that infrastructure as much as they would want to be respected, or that we would hope that structure respects them. And in terms of decision making, do I or do I not accept this offer, is for a very large part motivated by the arguments that Klasien is talking about, but also how their relationship to that healthcare infrastructure is. Because if there is sort of some troubled past between them, that will also influence their decision making, even if they trust or do not trust the functionality of the vaccine.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I hope, yeah.
Yes, thank you. So we are all experiencing now the consequences, and the impact of the COVID pandemic is very apparent in our daily lives for everyone. So our last question we want to address is, do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic is changing our vaccination behavior?
I'm not sure whether it changes, but I think it really has brought back massively the whole idea of infectious diseases again. I think many people live in a kind of context and have grown in an era where infectious diseases are more or less have eroded. We only have these child diseases, but people get vaccinated. We have here and there we have a flu, but that's it. And when people look at television and they see, of course, HIV in South Africa or tuberculosis, but in countries we feel like we are quite, this is not among us anymore. It's past. It's our past. We have overcome that. We have successfully fought infectious diseases. And of course, there were warnings, small warnings all the time about antimicrobial resistance, about Q fever, about other types of. We had polio in Ukraine, for instance, an outbreak, very severe. But nevertheless, we had a feeling like we can control it. it will be small. And I think now, the public will really realize that infectious diseases, that microbes, bacteria, viruses that we have to live with them forever.
Yeah.
And that we need to find a way to live with them, to coexist with them, to we need to and maybe that also entails not only making vaccines, but maybe also thinking again about how we structure our daily life, how we build our cities, what we do with our food practices, and I think there's a larger agenda, and I think that many people now will open their eyes to this larger agenda. Of course, magic bullets are nice, and we will have some of these magic bullets, but I think many more people now will realize that infections and infectious diseases, either via bacteria or via viruses, that they will be there forever.
Yeah, I think the key word is humility here. It has taught us to be humble again, and that our science and our technology, however great, is not always around to help us. It will help, it will do something, but ultimately it's only part of the strategy of options that we have. And humility is a key lesson that we all need to learn from time to time.
Thank you very much. I think we're already at the end of this first Maastricht Pint of Science event. On that note, thank you very much. I think we should toast one more time to Pint of Science, and also to our viewers with their great questions. Thank you very much. And also to our speakers, thank you very much that you took the time to answer our questions and be here with us and drink a pint of beer. And Linda, finally, there she is, of course, our Maastricht boss. So then, cheers.
Next
hopefully
event.
we'll have some more Maastricht.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers again, and have a nice evening.
Yes. Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.